Hi, my name is Miriam Lezak. I am an Acton Memorial Library trustee, but I am doing this not as a trustee, but as a citizen who just didn't see anybody putting this together. So this evening, we have a bunch of your elected and appointed officials. We have Joanne Berry, who is moderating, Alissa Nicol from the Select Board, Christine Russell on Finance Committee, Steve Noone, who is both FinCom and the chair of the Health Insurance Trust, which is one of the things that is causing some of these issues. Tori Campbell on school board and Rebeccah Wilson on school board. And with that, I'm going to let these folks get started. I will be walking around with pens and 3x5 index cards. If you have questions, raise your hand. I'll give you a card. I will collect them. And during the second half of this, Joanne will be directing the questions towards the forum, towards the override folks. So thank you. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming. I'm Christine Russell. I'm on the Finance Committee, and you may notice that I'm holding a microphone that's not making any noise in the room whatsoever. And that's okay. It's making noise apparently on the camera and on the video. So hopefully you can hear me. Please let me know if you can't. And I'm just going to do kind of a general summary of what an override entails in how we're going to experience it, if we do. Okay, so this, is a list of all the things that are in this presentation, but parts of it are going to be covered by some other folks here, so we're just going to move right along. Okay, so first things first is revenue, how the bills are paid when the citizens get together at town meeting and they vote on our budgets. That determines how much the community is going to spend, and these are the places that money comes from. So this is an example of a fiscal year 25 budget. Also, this is available on the town's website if you would like to print it out later. And I'm going to break it down what each of these buckets sort of mean. So the tax levy is our biggest revenue source. If we passed an FY25 B budget, which is the one that does not have an override, these are the dollar figures that would be used in that scenario. So obviously biggest bucket is the tax levy, and that's your tax bill. There's a few components in your tax bill, but that is the bulk of our revenue source. State aid, 1.5 million. Local receipts, which is your excise taxes, permits, fees, investment income, things like that. And then we've got town reserves. In general, we use town reserves within a certain limit for one-time capital spending, not for ongoing operating expenses. Okay, and then revenue that's not used in the budget would be excluded debt. Excluded debt is payments we make on capital projects that were voted on at town meeting to be paid for outside of your tax levy bill, outside of the tax levy. For instance, the North Acton Fire Station and the new Twin School building are all examples of excluded debt, and these payments are not in the operating budget. CPA is something else that's added to your tax bill. It's a 1.5% surcharge, and it is only for community housing efforts, historic preservation, open space, and outdoor recreation. So these are all part of the revenue the town uses in covering expenses, but not the operating budget in the case of these two buckets. So what is an operational override? So I just briefly covered a capital override, like for the fire station. With a capital override, we would vote to increase how much we could pull in taxes for the length of the borrowing. And then when the fire station is paid off, that limit comes back down. An operational override is permanent. So right now, we can tax up to 2.5% plus new growth. And an operational override would allow us to increase that by a specific dollar amount, and then that becomes the new limit. So if we normally tax roughly 3%, we could say that's not going to provide enough income for this year. We need to tax up to, say, $5 million, and it's not a percentage, it's a dollar. That becomes the new basis. The following year, 2.5% plus new growth would be added to that number, whatever that is. That's how an override works, okay? And I'm so sorry, I just want to say, it's an authorization to tax that high. So if we vote to approve an override dollar amount, we authorize the town to tax up to that number. We do not necessarily agree that that is the number we want them to tax to. That's a different vote on the budget, okay? Okay, so the process is that Acton's town election will be Tuesday, April 30th. Some of you may have already gotten your ballots in the mail. I know we've had a couple come to my house. You'll be asked about who the town moderator should be, library trustee, a couple of other people are on the ballot, school committee members, and you'll be asked if you would like to approve or authorize an override of up to $6.6 million. And that's a simple majority vote. Regardless of whether that passes or fails, please come to town meeting. Town meeting is May 6th, and at town meeting we would vote our budgets. If the override passes, there would be 2 budgets presented at town meeting for consideration. If the override does not pass, there will be 1 budget at town meeting. And then Boxborough's town meeting also needs to pass the school budget, because if Acton passes a higher budget and Boxborough does not agree to it, we have to go back to the drawing board, and vice versa. Okay. This property impact bill slide is a little out of date. When I created it, it was with the idea that we would that the entities would be asking to tax to the full 6.6 million. And at this point, they are not planning to put before the town budgets that tax to the entire 6.6 million. So it's actually a little lower. And on that table over there, there is a chart of the potential tax implications of both budgets. Also on the town website, there's a calculator that you can use to figure out what your impact would be. And I think the important thing to realize about Budget A or Budget B is that there is an increase either way, and that one would be, if Budget B, a 3.49% increase, and Budget A would be the 3.49% plus whatever we have agreed to above that, okay? Ooh, that's not mine. That, in general, in a nutshell, is the override process, and I'm going to now pass it on to whoever's next.
That would be me. So again, I'm Tori Campbell. I'm on the school committee, and I'm not very good at sitting still, as some of you may have noticed when you watch school committee meetings. So I'm going to stand up and point at things. I think it helps if we start out by just looking at what we've known as kind of normal over the past couple of decades, because this isn't normal. So let's just start out with kind of how the process works, and then we can kind of talk about what is different about what we're facing today. So this is kind of the general cycle that happens. Our fiscal year runs from the 1st of July to the 1st of July. And really, we start digging into what that next year's budget is going to look like at the end of about the first quarter. So you know kind of where you're at with the current budget. Is it lining up to where you expected it? And in both the town and the school, we take a look at what is the level services model. In other words, starting from a point of if we did exactly what we're doing today next year, what do we project that would cost, and how does that compare to the amount of funding that we expect to come in? And so we just talked about how Prop 2.5 works, plus 0.5% of new growth. So just for simplicity's sake, say that new revenue is going to be what it was last year plus 3%. That is the maximum we can bring in. And so then we take a look at, okay, there are all these other things that are in our budget, and we have some historical data of how that works. Like we have some idea of what the maximum, what the minimum change has been, what the averages have been. Let's think about those. And where it gets interesting is that some of those change at more than 3%. This is how we get to have to really scratch our heads about balancing budgets. So for example, our fringes, as you'll see referred later in the slide, that's the insurance, that's looking at the healthcare. On average, that goes up by about 5.3% a year. Personnel costs. If we took exactly the people that we had today and we projected them a year forward, those costs would go up by 4%. And no, that does not mean that everybody's getting a 4% raise, although that would be awesome. What it actually means is you have a cost of living adjustment that reflects that costs go up every year. Your dollar doesn't buy as much every year as it did the year before. And so that's usually, kind of depends on what the contracts have been that were negotiated, but 1.5, sometimes about 2%. You have the cost of all the benefits that go with that, and you also have the cost of the experience that you have in somebody who's been there for a year. A brand new employee is just not as efficient and effective as one who's been there for a year, and as they've been there for a few more years, we pay them for that experience. So you've got some costs that are growing just by virtue of existing at a rate that is higher than 3%. And so that lands somewhere interesting in your Acton Town Meeting documentation, because we're normally focused on these yellow columns. That's the current year, and you want to see that net position right there. It's covered by my arrow, but it's a 0. You want that to be 0. That's a good thing, right? If you happen to look at the next year, you're going to see a deficit. And so I've got two that I just pulled out of a couple of old town meeting warrants. And so this is 2019, and hard to see because it's small, but it's about a $1.2 million deficit. And this one from last year, closer to 1.9. Essentially, if you're looking at that projection a year out and it's between about $1 and $1.5 million, that's okay, because we're probably going to be able to solve that through the Acton Leadership Group process, which is select board, finance committee, school committee, and a number of people just figuring out how do we go from this deficit to a 0. We're going to be able to figure that out over the course of a year as things become more certain. If it's bigger than that, you should probably be paying attention. And so you could tell with last year's being 1.9, we're starting to pay attention, right? We thought we could cover that. Turns out we can't. Stay tuned. We'll fill in those details. So you get yourself then into kind of the regular budget cycle and things start to become more clear. We get more information. We're not going to get perfect information. The governor isn't going to tell us what we're actually going to get in the way of revenues from the state until July. We will already have had town meeting by that. So realize that this process has uncertainties in it inherently. You'll hear from the finance committee. They'll present their point of view. You'll hear from both the school committee and the select board as they wrestle with both town and school budgets. And by the time we get to town meeting, you will have an appropriation presented to you to vote on. That's kind of what normal looks like. And normally, we don't end up having deep conversations about this until we hit town meeting because we figure things out. Well, there's some reasons over the past 20 years or so that things have worked out pretty normally. So what you're looking at is your consumer price index. So how much costs are going up, the cost of doing business every year. And I want to highlight that just because some of those bars go down does not mean that costs are going down. It means their rate of increase isn't as high. And you'll notice that some of them are highlighted in red. It's because that's when costs are going up more than 3%. So this is kind of interesting because you can see there's a correlation between when we see overrides necessary with when costs are going up and staying high. And when we've had a period of really prices being fairly stable in their growth below that 3% line, that's made it a lot easier to make our budgets balance. So there just haven't been pressures for a lot of recent years that have been as steep as here and as steep as you can see there in the early 90s. But it's not just that. So again, I mentioned that on average, we have a number of really big chunks of our budget that grow at greater than 3%. And so this is from about 2024 on, you're looking at sort of those average projections, right? So say they all grew at the average rate every single year. They're never all that consistent, except for this year, everything's going up. But in general, say that were happening. you can see that that red line, which is those non-discretionary expenses, your insurance, health insurance, your retirement, special education in the school's case, keeping your facilities open, transporting students, again, in the school's case, those things eventually eat up everything you can get from your 3%. So that means that we, every year, have to go back and look at how do we do business better. And there are a couple of places here where you can see a bit of a slope change in that red line. So there's your average growth model that I was talking about, getting out of control on us, right? You can see the high growth model, and you saw costs increasing. That explains a lot of what's gone on in the recent years. So there is actually kind of a change in slope. It's a little steeper here than it is compared to average. And then you have that little note there about in-district savings. I'll address that in a moment. But as I look back over the past 10 years or so, there are a couple of areas that I have seen on the schools side where there have been some real efforts to think through how we're doing business, revamp some things, and save some money. First is regionalization. So in regionalizing, there was an opportunity to collapse about $750,000 worth of personnel in order to reduce that overhead. So there were efficiencies there. That was a good thing. About 1% of the budget when I went back and took a look at that. The next big one has been special ed costs. And you're going to hear more about special ed costs later on. But in 2018, we actually made the decision to stand up some programs within our district that would serve our students here in our own schools, which is good for them because then they get to go to school with the same kids that they're doing activities with and the same kids that they live next door to, as opposed to when we have to send them out of district, they're getting on a bus, they're going on a long bus ride, they're going to a school with expensive tuition. And so you can kind of get a feel for that. An out-of-district tuition, and this is for a single school, on the low end and the high end for this particular program, and that's for a single student in a program that has 70 students, whereas the cost per student to keep them in district is much lower. So it makes sense from a financial standpoint, and it makes sense from the standpoint of taking care of students and families. So as I look at where special ed costs are now, and you'll get to hear more about that in a moment, it makes me really glad that we made some of these changes a while back, because that makes the impact of some of what we're seeing today not as strong. So on the district's part, you've seen reorganization at the staff level, reorganization at the district leadership level that has cut positions. You've seen in-district special education programs. You've seen us look at new buildings, et cetera, and figure out, those are not just the paying to build the building, but also we have to be able to operate the building as it moves forward. We need it to be as efficient as possible. And also pulling in competitive grants. Those are ways that the district has been dealing with those costs that grow at higher than 3% and still trying to keep us away from this override discussion. And I want to turn this over to Alissa to talk a little bit about what's the town's been doing.
All right, so the town has found ways to balance the budget, provide services, complete infrastructure projects, planning studies, and address community needs by having the staff implement creative solutions. So one of the things that the staff has been excellent at recently, and maybe always, I'm not sure, is aggressive pursuit of competitive grants. So the town brought in $15.5 million over the past 5 years, $2.2 million just in the 18 months between June 2022 and December 2023. An example of a grant that Acton has received is the $1.4 million that went to the cost of removing the River Street Dam, which was a dangerous dam that posed a risk to properties downstream. We implemented an online permitting system using ARPA, or American Rescue Plan Act funds, and that has increased revenues and improved operational efficiency. There have been several reorganizations and efficiency measures initiated in our departments, taking advantage of natural attrition, retirement. Some examples of that are the IT and GIS, and the public facilities was merged into a single department, operations, so they can better coordinate internal support for the organization. Another merger was the finance and human resources departments to improve operational oversight and support succession planning efforts. Most recently, we merged departments to create a health and human services without increasing the headcount. And that leads to greater efficiencies. Several direct reports to the town manager were removed from reporting to the town manager and now report to the new Health and Human Services Director, and aligns better the departments that naturally closely work together. We also share staff with other towns. We share an electrical inspector with Littleton. We share a veteran services officer with Boxborough. And there are also regional services that we have contracts for. The one example is the Regional Housing Services Office that provides some really specialized staff work that would be too expensive for the town to maintain in the organization.
So these are kind of the things in general then that you see across the town and the school that have been holding off an override, especially since 2020, because that's about when we bumped up onto our levy capacity, and that 3% has been holding us really tightly. Reducing staff and not filling positions that we needed, and you'll hear more about that as we go along, but we've been cutting people for a couple of years now. Consolidating management positions, pushing off projects and maintenance. And I'll add that a lot of this also for the town has been because Minuteman's assessment has been going up, and that has mostly been absorbed by the town. There's a point at which you can't continue to push off maintenance and projects because they're going to blow up in your face and you will have to deal with them right then. Contracting out projects that require specialized knowledge and skills. You can't keep everybody on staff. If you need specialized expertise, you have to go out and contract for that. We just can't afford to keep all of the experts on our staff. And then, again, asking our staff to do more. But there's a point at which you can't continue to ask people to do more with less. You're strung too thin, and that brings us to today.
Thank you. Rebeccah Wilson, School Committee. So you've heard a few examples of how our town and district have worked to not only be fiscally responsible but innovative. However, they represent one-time adjustments to the expenses reflected in the model we described at the beginning. They reset the baseline of what it costs to run a school, but we're still up against the dynamics of expenses that outpace revenue. In fact, Acton has been at its levy limit for tax revenue and severely curbing spending since 2020. We've known for a few years that an override was likely coming, but based on our model, we did not anticipate the magnitude or urgency of the need in 2025. So, what changed? Well, a few unexpected shocks to the system in October have made the need for an override more pressing this year. As you heard, and I'm sure you've experienced in your own lives, the consumer price index, well above 3% for 3 years running, means baseline costs for everything have increased, sometimes more than 20%. This goes for groceries, construction costs, you name it. As a result, the state approved increases to special education tuition for out-of-district placements to be passed on to districts, and transportation costs have exploded. Meanwhile, more students require specialized services, which means providing the staff and teachers to support them. So let's talk a little bit more about each of these cost drivers. Special ed students are being identified earlier, which is good long-term. Those students are able to get better services and are better supported than they have been in years past. There's still a long way to go, but we have made great strides. But of course, this increases the number of students being served overall. We've also seen post-pandemic impacts to this population of students, leading to a severity of need. In order to provide the necessary supports for these students, some staff have needed to be added, such as a special ed coordinator to ensure smooth and appropriate delivery of services. The state approved an increase of 14% for out-of-district tuitions, which is covered by districts through a circuit breaker fund and then reimbursed by the state the following year. But this is not full coverage of district costs. And over time can create an issue where the number of students being served out of district increases, along with the cost of their services as we're seeing now. The district has made an effort, as you heard, to move more of these services in district, lowering costs overall, but this requires investment to continue. There have also been demographic shifts in our community, bringing in more multilingual learner students as well as lower income students. And I want to pause here and remind listeners that everyone has the right to freedom of movement in this country, and we support families' rights to move to our community and attend our schools. This demographic shift actually represents a wonderful opportunity for our students to learn from each other and to have a diversity of experiences. But we also know this does create a budget impact, where there is more need for staff who can adequately meet the needs of all students. As a regional district, there are certain legal requirements around transportation that we must meet, such as providing busing for all students at no additional cost to families. Costs have increased both due to a rise in fuel and maintenance, but also due to the ongoing shortage of drivers and lack of adequate reimbursement from the state. I think you can all sense a theme here. When we did at the time of regionalization, we were told that the reimbursement from the state would be close to 90%, but we barely get 70% on a good year. And that's at the whim of the governor who sets their budget each spring. Our health insurance trust has seen unprecedented claims for both the town and school district. As a result, we've had to divert funding and dip into our limited reserves for this year, and also wrap the increased expenses into next year's budget, once again raising the baseline of our costs. And Steve will share some more about this in a moment. I also want to pause and say, people using their earned health insurance is appropriate. People should get the services that they earned through their job, but it does impact the budget. Now let's talk about the changes in education over the past few decades. Many people have asked why we cannot simply increase class sizes and solve the budget issue by reducing staffing costs. Well, lower class sizes are known to produce better results, and our district policy is in line with the Department of Ed's recommendations. Students are doing small group work, hands-on learning, and critical thinking, which requires more of our educators than lining up students and doing rote memorization. New curriculum, while simultaneously cutting the leadership and support positions that enable our educators to implement change in the classroom, creates an issue as well. 20 years ago, the full benefit of art, music, and athletic programs were not fully recognized or valued, leading to deep cuts to those programs in many schools. Today, we recognize the need to maintain these programs to provide students with a diversity of opportunities. Some students are never going to be academically minded, but might come to school simply because they love the theater program or playing lacrosse. Also, behavior management is very different than it was in the past. We are identifying the root cause of a student's behavior and keeping them in school rather than punitive steps that pushed students out of school. These changes take time to see the full impact, with SEL laying a strong foundation. And we know it's already working. We can see the results, even in these early days of implementation. And we cannot stop now and reverse course when the past was not beneficial or benevolent. For the town, higher bids for projects, road paving, etc., utilities, salaries, the HIT impact, and an ongoing lack of proper funding for services the town provides has been an ongoing issue for many years. The town has been making cuts. Perhaps they haven't advertised that as loudly as they should have to make people aware that they've been operating on a shoestring budget, and you can only do that for so long. We're waiting on needed capital projects like new HVAC, plumbing, and roofing, which leads to increased costs over time. Construction costs go up for materials as well as for the labor. And now I'm going to pass it to Steve.
And I'm Steve Noone. I'm a longtime member of the Finance Committee and chair of the Health Insurance Trust. It's beginning to sound like a lecture, so I'll ask a question. How many people heard of the Health Insurance Trust? How many knew about it before this year? Okay. Not you, John. So 21 years ago, the town and the schools formed the Health Insurance Trust. It's to provide health insurance for the employees. It's a self-insured plan as opposed to a fully insured plan. And by that I mean, although Blue Cross and Harvard Pilgrim administer the claims, they don't actually absorb the risk. The trust pays the claims. So the trustees are appointed by the select board, the school committee, and one member from the finance committee. It sets rates, it collects the premiums, it pays the claims. It doesn't do the plan design, so it doesn't say what copay should be or deductible should be. Those are pretty much just offerings of Blue Cross and Harvard Pilgrim. To protect itself from large claims, it engages in what's called reinsurance or stop-loss insurance, which means we buy insurance for any claim that's going to be in excess of $175,000 for an individual claim. And we have an independent treasurer, a consultant to advise us on rates and program adjustments, and we have an annual audit conducted by an independent CPA. So, can I go to the next slide? Okay. So for the past few years, the trust has encountered some issues around large claims. We have one claim that's $750,000 a year every year. It's been going on for about 5 or 6 years. The cost of reinsurance has doubled since 2019 because large claims are becoming more and more prevalent. And the pandemic and related claims kind of did a job on our reserve position. We entered the current year with reserves of under $1 million. So let's see. So what we did was we set our rates a little bit ahead of what Blue Cross and Blue Shield had told us to expect for claims growth, which was 7%. We also had negotiated a different rebate program, which was going to save the trust $500,000, maybe $1 million this year. We hired a new consultant to look at other cost-saving opportunities and alternative models because we were getting scared about the large claims. And so that consultant started on July 1st of this year. They came up with about $2 million more in savings, and they came up with some alternatives like larger joint purchasing groups or going to the state-sponsored plan. But even as the ink was drying on their PowerPoint presentations, if we go to the next slide. So this shows the claims and premium growth from July 2020 to February of 2024. And as you can see, the lines were pretty much lining up. There was always ups and downs until the very end of the last fiscal year and the beginning of this. And that spike with the gray line is above the yellow line is $3 million. $3 million is 17% of all the claims we would expect in a given year, and that $3 million was submitted by 3 individuals. 11 individuals, sorry. So, as I said, we entered the year with less than $1 million in reserves, and we had basically a $3 million bill to pay in September. We would get $1 million of it back through the reinsurance, but that wouldn't happen for several months. So we wound up asking for a loan from the town and the schools of $2 million, which we got. And in order to get the plan back in balance, we implemented a 22.8% increase effective January 1st. So, as I said, we put an 8% increase in July 1st, and now at 22.8%. So we increased the rates by 30%, which effectively, because we didn't get the 22% into the second half of the year, it'll be less than that. Year-to-date claims are running 23% ahead of where they were last year at this time, not 7 like it was predicted. So at that point, we formed a healthcare working group to look at the problem, and that consisted of the town manager and some of his key staff, superintendent and some of his staff. I was on it, and the representatives of all the collective bargaining units in the town were also represented, as were the retirees. And we looked at the situation and came to the conclusion that the health insurance trust, which had worked very well for 20 out of 21 years, was probably past its time. That the individual claims were just getting too large for us to absorb, and the reinsurance premium was getting too expensive. So at that point, it's been decided that we will dissolve the trust as of June 30th, and we are going to the Massachusetts Interlocal Insurance Agency, or MIA, which is an extremely large joint purchasing group, and I can assure you that we will not have this problem again. Essentially, actually, their rates are a little lower. Now that we went up 30%, they'll be a little lower. But it came up as kind of a tsunami of claims, and literally we dealt with it as fast as I've ever seen anything dealt with in this town over the years.
Is that all the info?
We're almost done.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Sorry.
This was A and B budget.
Okay, I'm going to start here.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. So this brings us to the budget options. The A budget is unanimously recommended by the Select Board, School Committee, and Finance Committee as a compromise budget that funds what we absolutely need at the least increased cost to the taxpayer. If an override passes, this is the budget we will vote on at town meeting. The B budget reflects what will be funded under Prop 2.5 if the override vote fails. It will have a tremendous impact on services and education in our community. For the schools, this will be the third year of cuts in a row, whether the override passes or not. This is certainly not an argument to support the B budget. Instead, this is a wake-up call that the school funding model is fundamentally broken. We should not be in this position after the tireless work already done to keep the budget under a certain threshold. I encourage all of you to go back and watch the video of Budget Saturday, available on ActonTV's YouTube page, to see the scope of this work. We are being fiscally responsible and have gone through each line item to justify the need and make necessary, though painful, cuts. And yet, we are still in this position, advocating for a budget that makes further cuts. We need a change to the funding model, something that we have no control over, and are continuing to advocate for the state and federal governments to enact change in this regard. But until something happens at that level, we are left to come together as a community and do what we can to make this work. And this year, the best course of action is an override, something we have not had to consider for 20 years. It is time.
So the town's B budget will come to town meeting should the override fail at the ballot, and that is approximately $840,000 less than the proposed municipal budget and capital plan, which is the A budget. And again, it's important to note that the A budgets for the town and the school already represent significant cuts, about $5 million below the level services funding. For the town, no override means a reduction of about 10 positions, and those positions would impact the library, police, fire, clerk, and nursing departments. We'd have deferred equipment replacement, such as police cruisers. Events would be eliminated, like July 4th, not this year, because that's in FY24's budget. Hazardous waste day, flu clinics, etc. There would be reduced maintenance at the Arboretum, parks, rail trails, and we would have a reduction in capital investments. So just some specific examples of cuts that are in that B budget: 2 per diem nursing positions, reduced funding for engineering studies and small road repair jobs. Everybody cares about potholes, correct? Sunday hours at the Memorial Library will be eliminated. We would lose an additional impact shift to support the fire department. So this is a paramedic that would work just the busiest shift. The full-time clinician, the second full-time clinician at the police department would be reduced to a half-time position. And the Prospect Main Street intersection, there's some safety improvements planned there and already designed. That would have to be deferred to another year. Also, some of the sidewalk construction and safety improvements that are planned for Great Road. And as you know, there have been a lot of incidents and fatalities on Great Road recently, and we are getting support from the state, but obviously we need to support that as well.
For the district, the A budget represents a $3.1 million cut to level services, which goes far deeper than our efforts to balance the budget at Prop 2.5 revenue in a typical year, and will have a greater impact than our usual school budget proposals. It represents the third year of cuts to staff and programs and removing an additional 25 full-time positions in 2025, in addition to the already reduced 40 positions across district: leadership, teachers, assistants, facilities, and transportation over the last couple of years. There will be an increase for sports, parking, pre-K, and all-day kindergarten, something that we've been striving to bring down to a no cost for families, will now in fact have to be raised. It does preserve the core of the most strategic initiatives that help us recognize when and how all of our students need support to learn and respond effectively, which is a really important part of how we ensure all of our students are prepared for success in life when they graduate from high school. The B budget, by comparison, will tremendously disrupt the quality of learning in our district. It represents $9.3 million in reductions from level services and unprecedented cuts to staff and services. In addition to the 40 positions reduced in 2023 and 2024, this budget cuts another 86 positions. As a result, class sizes will exceed school committee guidelines, and fewer support staff will be available to support students when they have something disrupting their ability to learn. At the elementary school level, 180 to 220 students will need to be transferred to new schools because of the reduction in class sections. This budget breaks the strategic direction for 4 key initiatives. We will have limited ability to recognize and respond to factors that disrupt learning for all but our highest needs students. We risk degradation of our infrastructure by severely reducing capital spending. We further postpone OPEB funding, which is the Retiree Health Insurance Trust, which has long-term impacts on both borrowing and balancing the operational budget. And I think for brevity, we'll just leave it there so you can see that. One of the most important takeaways from this discussion should be the inherent tension between a revenue system that tops out at 3% and expenses that grow at a higher rate during typical times. And these times aren't typical.
So Christine touched on this at the very beginning of the presentation, but just to review the override process and important dates, Acton votes on the override at the annual election on April 30th. A simple majority vote on the ballot question would bring the A budget to annual town meeting, which is on May 6th. You may vote early at the clerk's office during operating hours up until noon on April 29th. And mail-in ballots, if you have those, they need to be at the town hall by 8 p.m., the close of the polls on April 30th. So either in the drop boxes or arriving in the mail. At annual town meeting on May 6th in Acton, voters will vote on the budget. A, if the override passes, B, if the override fails. for the town's operating expenses and Acton's assessment for the schools. Again, this is a simple majority vote. And then additionally, on May 13th at Boxborough Town Meeting, voters will vote on Boxborough's school assessment. I do have copies of property tax exemptions. It's just a one-page document that's available on the website, but I printed some up from the assessor. But I didn't put them over on the table just yet because I need to let you know that this is from fiscal year 24, so the deadline has already passed. You can submit an application for fiscal year 25 if you qualify on July 1st. These numbers will change. Typically, they are slightly higher income minimums and occasionally slightly higher exemption amounts for certain exemption types. So this will be over on the table, but just realize that this is for FY24.
All right. So first, thank you, and thank you all for coming. This is a lot of information, and I appreciate that people came out to learn more. I will, just as town moderator, tell you right up front that we will be planning on two nights for town meeting. We will get to the budget on the first night, both budgets, and in time for people to get their kids from childcare, which is going till about 9. So we will make that happen so that people don't have to come back for that. Someone has expressed that this might be a one-sided forum, and that keepactonaffordable.org is out there. I would point out that we elect our officials to do the budget, and this is the budget they have done, and they're telling us about it. You can decide for yourself if they've told you to vote for it, which they kind of have, but that's okay. You can't, they need to make their budget and ask for support from it. If they had said, we're going to cut the heck out of this, they would have been here doing the same thing. So there's that. So one question is, there's some short questions and then some longer questions. So we'll try to get through some of the ones that are kind of maybe easier to answer. How much is the actual annual budget for school and town? Do we have a, right now? Or I would say the proposed one, like in a big number, what is it? That's with and without the override, I would say. Total amount.
We've had 9 budget presentations, so there's a lot of them.
Okay, so for the A budget for the schools, the total budget appropriation, which is not just the town of Acton, so this is Acton and Boxborough both, is $114 million. Now you're going to make me read like warrants. $114,380,105. And the B budget is $108,062,386.
So Boxborough's assessment out of that total will be $15,960,274. And the rest of it will be paid by Acton, which is $79,070,675. So it gets a little tricky once you have to factor in those percentages.
So I think this is the most up-to-date. The A budget for the town side is $38,536,688. And the B budget is $38,263,072. Yeah.
Okay, and do we know what the expected annual growth of the tax base is predicted to be? No? Could be a little, I mean, with new growth and stuff.
The tax base, like
the new growth portion?
Or what is expected annual growth of tax base?
Tax base?
That would be how I'd interpret.
Oh, of the levy. Sorry. You're talking about the entire growth of the taxes, right?
Property tax that this benefit is based on.
So the A budget is, I think, if I don't, I may not be understanding exactly what you're trying to get at. So the A budget would, on the town side, is an increase of 3.92%? No, okay.
I mean, how many more people are going to move in to take extra?
Do you anticipate
I
the
don't,
property value that the taxes are based on?
not, that's,
To increase or decrease?
yeah. That's not something that's in my wheelhouse, I'm sorry.
I think the confusion relates to the fact that, let's suppose magically, all of the properties doubled in value. What would happen is the select board would meet, and they would basically cut the tax rate in half. So that 2.5% factor, that's what's actually gonna go up. So if your tax bill today was $10,000, then it can go up under Prop 2.5 by 2.5%. Nothing else can happen, and that's independent of who buys a house or whether your house is up in value or anything else.
My question was, are the number of houses in the town increasing, which increases the base that the tax is going to be based on?
So the tax is based on what's voted on at town meeting, however many dollars are spent, and then that's spread out by the population. So
For the properties.
right. So we
Yeah.
don't get more money if more people move in. We get exactly as much money as we have voted to tax.
But if there's new growth. But that's in the future.
In general,
that's
that would
not
be the
based-
next year, right? And in
Yeah.
general, it's about 0.5%. So
Okay.
usually
Yeah.
it's about 0.5% in general.
Couple of questions about the school population. First of all, is the school population forecasted to increase or decrease over the next 5 years, or whatever period you might have?
The population of students is decreasing a little bit, but they do projections based on housing that's being built, people moving into town, and it is projected to go up again within 6 years. So it's kind of hard to say exactly when that might pick up again, but we know that it likely will.
No, it's not. I can.
And then there's another question about average class size in K to 6, and what is the average class size K to 6 now, and what would it be if the override fails?
So the average class size, our recommendation for elementary right now is 22 students, which is in line with the Department of Ed's recommendations. If we could hold on to that across the board for the most part with the A budget. Every year when we calculate kindergarten, sometimes there's a few more students, sometimes there's a few less, but we generally are pretty on target with our estimations, and we'd be able to hold to that. With the B budget, we're looking at an increase of, maybe 4 to 6 students per class, but it's kind of hard to say exactly. It would be very disruptive to have to move from, say, 3 sections of first grade at Conant down to 2 sections, and then ask those students to be dispersed among different schools, possibly leaving their siblings, and creating issues for parents, trying to deal with transportation and all. So, and that could be scary for a student to be pulled out of their home environment, especially a little kid, and put into a new school. So the goal is to keep class sizes low and to keep disruptions to a minimum.
Then, while we're on school population, how many special needs students are currently enrolled? And I know there's some that are, as you noted, served within programs within AB, and some that go to other placements.
So pause here for class sizes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I will.
Do you have any from like a trend from like years before? Because I think it's been going progressively down, right?
The population of students, it has been going down. Yep.
Yep, so I'll show you
But
that.
what happens is, there's a bubble, So actually, the year after me in junior high, we had four teams in junior high, and the year after me, there was an extra like 200 students, so they had to add a fifth wing. And so then it went down again. So this does ebb and flow. That's expected. We know it will go back up. Degrowth is not going to be a thing that is a trend.
Special needs population?
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers offhand, so I'm hoping that it is in here.
So this is a slice of our special education population. It's not all of them. These are a couple of particular programs, and then I'll scan through here and see if I have some other aggregate numbers for you. So if you want to field another question while I do.
Okay.
Yeah, that slide addressed the elementary population. So 3 of the schools have in-house programs. And I think one of them, the highest, was 70 students. And then there are out-of-district placements and students at the junior high and high school as well.
When they say special education, does that mean any student on an IEP?
Yes.
There's a few questions here. There's confusion, perhaps, about what level services means and what, level, no, that's not it. And student enrollment has declined, yet we need more services and more staff, but staff is being, there's just a lot of confusion
Yeah, and
about all of those things.
I understand that, and that's why I hoped that my notes, what I said earlier, would be helpful to sort of say education is different than it was. 20 years ago, when I was in the AB school system, there was less small group work, the curriculum was different, some schools didn't have some of the programming, so just a lot has changed for the better. I've had the conversation about level services with a few people, so I think I am understanding what people are asking, because I thought the question was just simply, how does this work? We take what we spent last year, assume we would want to spend the same amount, that's the level service, we add the 3% for, the assumed increases. Unfortunately, when we look forward, most increases are above 3%. When it comes to utility costs, staffing, every line item, you can look at it, they generally are over 3%. The assumption that we would want to spend the same amount is because we're proud of the work that is being done in the schools. We want to continue that work. So, of course, we are looking at each line item. We are looking under every rock. We are looking in every corner. We are trying to save money. I don't think any of us want our tax bills to go up. It's not fun, especially when we're all spending more on groceries. But these are difficult times. So, I invite people to dig into all of the work that's been done in the past. I think that there's a lot of transparency this go around. I think that we've been pretty fiscally responsible.
I'll just add a little bit on the town side. What happens in the budget process is that all of the department heads present a budget to the town manager of what they need in order to continue to provide the services for the townspeople. So services like the library, snow plowing, cleanup of trees after a storm, any services that, in the cemetery department, facilities, the clerk's office, elections, town meeting, and the town manager, and also, new equipment like police cruisers, because you got to get rid of them after they've been used and reached a certain mileage. So the town manager always says, nope, that's too much, and requires all of the department heads to bring down their budgets. So what he's presenting to the select board initially is already a reduction from what the staff feel that they need And that includes, increased costs. One of the things that was mentioned was road paving. In the last 2 years, road paving costs have gone up 40%. The cost of electricity, the cost of paper, the cost of everything has gone up. Utilities, supplies, vehicles. So that's presented to the select board. So it's not even really a level services budget because it's already been trimmed. And then the select board asked for that budget to be reduced again by $1 million. And then we had another reduction of $1 million. So these are compromises. We're cutting before bringing what we feel is a reasonable amount to ask for voters to approve at the ballot.
I think the easiest way to describe it is level services is a model. It is how we compare apples to apples. It's how we all have the same frame of reference of what we're doing this year, what it would cost to do exactly what we're doing this year, next year, based on our best guess. So just think of it as a model. It's not an absolute, it's not what has to be, it's just our starting point. I have some numbers for you. They're percentages, not total population. But our multilingual learners, so students whose first language is not English, 24% of our student population. That's a lot. It is almost doubled in the past 2 years. That number is skyrocketing. Of those who qualify as multilingual learners, that's 7.7%. So we have a number of those students who have actually either they came in with English good enough that we didn't need to make sure that we were reinforcing that, or they have gone through our program and they have graduated out of it. So we still track them, but they don't necessarily have to have multi-language learner supports. Our students with disabilities are a little over 16% of our total population. By the way, that's not huge compared to other districts. When you go and take a look at kind of where we fall compared to districts around Massachusetts, we are kind of below the average, actually. So that's not a huge number of students, but it's a significant population. High needs, and that is kind of a collection of a number of different categories. It's students who probably need more support for some sort of way that encompasses all these categories. That's almost 32%, almost a third of our students.
Sort of overlap between the...
Yeah, it's all the rest of these subgroups, yeah. And I'm reading them, I think, in possibly alphabetical order. So I'll give you low income yes. And some of them may qualify in multiple places. So you could have somebody whose first language is not English, who is also a multilingual learner, who is also receiving special education and might also come from a low-income family. There we go.
Okay, so the library is going to turn into a pumpkin and we have to leave. But one of the other questions that came up, and I think Alissa might have had the answer to it, but I'll just point it out again. Some, of course, seniors are worried about the increase in tax and what opportunities are available there and program, whatever. You're the knower.
Sure. The town actually budgets $800,000 for property tax relief, exemptions, and other programs. There's a senior work program. That is the information that's on that one pager, but the numbers are from last year, and applications won't be accepted until July 1st. In terms of the impact to a home, I just want to remind everyone that your taxes are going up next year anyway, just like they always do. So for my property, I also want to say that along with the tax impact table and the calculator on the website, there is a histogram, a bar graph, which shows the spread of home in Acton at different values. 70% of the homes in Acton are below the average value of $840,000. So the $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million plus homes are skewing our average higher. So I have a home that's much lower than average. So next year my taxes are going to go up regardless, $26 a month. If the override doesn't pass, that's what I'm going to see. If the override does pass, that's $75. Actually, $29, $75. So I'm looking at another $46 a month. Divide that by 30 days in a month, and it's like $1.50 a day. So, you know, I was talking to Rebeccah before we got started, and we all are feeling the cost increases everywhere we go. Our health insurance, our groceries, our fuel, our utilities. The town and the schools are also feeling those increases. When I look at my household budget, I can make adjustments and cuts that are not going to impact my family in a hugely negative way. It's a little bit different when you're talking about schools and towns, your local government. When we ask for fiscal management that is in alignment with our household management budgets that we have to do, it's not the same impact because you're impacting the quality of education, you're impacting how quickly, you know, roads get plowed, how quickly those potholes get filled. So just look on the website for that information. It's very, very useful. It's a lot less scary than a lot of us when we hear $6.6 million. It's a lot less scary. Just look at your home value.
Okay, no, we have to end here, but I will say, I did have a question. Can you get a ride to voting and town meeting? Yes. You just have to call the number, which I do not have at hand, but it is on the town website. It is published in the warrant. Call the day before. The van will come and pick you up and bring you back. So that, and you don't need to be a senior citizen or handicapped. Anybody can access that service. And there's tons of questions, maybe not tons, but questions that didn't get asked, please contact these folks, email.
Any of the officials, email the superintendent, email the town manager. We're here to answer your questions.
Find them at the coffee shops, all of the things.